Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Joseph Henning. I'm the president and CEO for the Henry County Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you all to our fourth community dialogue. Today, we are discussing Tears We Cannot Stop by Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, and I am excited for this conversation today because we've got some great individuals here that I think will help us figure out a little bit more about the message in the book, to decide how we can implement it and work through it, and especially collectively work to improve the Henry County community and work together to achieve what we need to achieve for the good quality of life that we all want. Joining me today, we have Amanda Thomas with Story on the Square. Hello, Amanda. We have Kipper Jones, an activist and entertainer here in the Henry County area. Kipper, good morning. We have Dr. Gaddis from Mount Olive Baptist Church. Good morning, Dr. Gaddis. And Laura Luker, who is Director of Tourism with the Henry County Convention and Visitors Bureau. So welcome all of you today. And I just want to start it off a little bit with the quote that Dyson ends his introduction with. And it's, "The time is at hand for reckoning with the past, recognizing the truth of the present, and moving together to redeem the nation for our future. And if we don't act now, if you don't address race immediately, there very well may be no future." And so I think that is just pretty much right where he puts it, and like everything else in the book, it's hard truth. It really does speak to the issues of our society and our country, and keep in mind, you know, if those of you out on Facebook Live or on Zoom haven't read it, this was originally published around 2017, so it was right after a presidential election, and there was a little bit of discussion around the outcome and what that meant with some of the societal changes that were going on at the time. And so he does really pull from a lot of the current events in that as he has the discussion. But I want to open it up a little bit with our guests today and see, with their backgrounds and their interest in that, what did they take away from that quote and recognizing the present and moving to redeem the nation? Where do we start? Where do we go? Where have we been? And so I know that's kind of a really broad place to be, but I think it really does have to be there. We really do have to look at the past in order to and acknowledge it, and it's not so much learn from the past. In some ways, I think it's even relearn from the past. I think that, you know, some of it has been, some of us have been misinformed through our education system and that. And so I want to open that up for conversation. You know, we can take that anywhere we want to go, but, you know, Kipper, maybe you can start us a little bit with, as an activist in that, what do we need to do as a united group?
Again, thank you so much, Joseph. I appreciate you guys having me. I don't do this very often.
You're doing fine.
We're not doing that today. But I think that what we're doing, again, having the conversation, is the major step. I think what we find ourselves doing a lot in the current atmosphere. I can only really kind of speak to that because I wasn't here for, you know, the civil rights struggle as much as I admire what our heroes did during that time. But I know that where we are right now, we do a lot of talking past each other, a lot of talking at each other. We don't do much talking to each other, and we don't do a lot of listening. And I think that, especially in terms of this piece, this book, and even the way that it's set up, Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. Much like most of us, or some of us, and I know especially Dr. Gaddis, was raised in church. And I know that when you're in service and there is a church service going on, I was raised to shut up and listen. You be quiet and listen. And I think that the way that he sets this up in this very sermonic way puts us in the position that we have to kind of just sit back and listen. It is uncomfortable. It is kind of piercing in spots. I was like, wow, I'm glad he's not really kind of speaking to me, but I'm glad that the subjects are coming up, and I'm glad that it's happening. So in my view, I just think that the conversation itself is of ultimate benefit, because that's where the exchange of ideas, the exchange of our foundations, and why some of us find things so difficult really comes to the fore if we're having the conversation. So that's how I kind of see that piece happening. So I think this is very important.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that, and I think that might be it. You know, again, he's very articulate. You know, he didn't just put the words on paper. You know, he really chose those words as he was writing them, and I think that force with which he writes, I think at times can be off-putting to some, and I think that's why it takes a bit to get through this book, um, because I think there's so much to absorb and apply. And even to this point, I can't absorb all of it and apply it all, and that's why I'm counting on all of you to help me through this. Dr. Gaddis, that's a great point that Kipper brings up, that it is subtitled "A Sermon to Write a Sermon." As pastor at the Baptist Church, how do you feel that sermon helped, that creating it as a sermon? You know, there is that part where we do have to follow. We do listen, and again, Kipper shares, you know, you pay attention and all of that. Is that written more for the white reader, or is it you know, is bringing in the sermon to be more inclusive? How do you take that piece?
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you for having me. When I started reading the book, I immediately related to him, because for me, sometimes preaching and presenting it in a sermon helps me to articulate things that I probably could not articulate in a conversation as well. So for me as a Baptist preacher, the format made sense to me as a way of effectively communicating what he was thinking. But also as a preacher, what I realized immediately in the book was, and you've probably heard this term before, in a very real sense, he may be preaching to the choir. He's preaching to people who are already of goodwill. First of all, to even read this book speaks to a mindset that is already open to some level of racial healing. To pick up this book as a white American already makes you what I call part of the choir. You already, number one, recognize that there may be a problem. You may recognize that you may have somehow contributed to that problem, or want to at least figure out a way to get us to a better place of reconciliation, racial reconciliation in this country. So you're already part of the choir. As it relates to what you talked about, the future, staying with the metaphor, it's figuring out how to grow the choir now, right? It's figuring out how to include more people in this conversation, because honestly, I'm curious, and I said it as we were getting prepared, I'm curious to how many people even want to listen to this dialogue. Granted, there are people who will listen. There are a lot of people who don't want to listen. And I think what Dr. Dyson talked about, the problem in America right now as it relates to true racial reconciliation is white privilege, is white denial, but mostly it's white indifference, that there's a group of people who really just don't care and want to maintain a certain status quo. And until we figure out how to reach them, then it's going to be hard to really move forward. We have to figure out a way to grow the choir. We have to figure out a way to include more people in the conversation, because unless and until we do that, change will be modest, and change will the future will improve only modestly, unless we figure out a way to get more people to engage in these kind of conversations, particularly white America, to engage in these conversations.
Yeah. Thank you. I think as we were preparing this morning and having the conversation before we went live, I think part of the frustration that we all see is recognizing the need to address this through conversation and through action. We have to have action. But converting more to the choir is difficult when it's seen as a win-lose game. And
Exactly.
if somebody's going to win, then that means I'm going to lose. And I think that's such a sad state to see us in, because in my opinion, again, it's only my opinion, I think that there's so much that we can all win. Right? It could be a win-win partnership, a win-win allyship, things like that, that I think there's so much to be gained from it, that I hope that that's part of what these conversations and dialogues will do, is make more people aware of the opportunity to find the win-win. Thank you. Amanda, good morning. I know I want to thank you and Story on the Square, because you were the ones that did tip me off to this book and purchased it a few months ago and that. And so I want to thank you and welcome you this morning. And I know that you had done, you had prepped with this book for community dialogue, so you all understand too that the importance of having a conversation around this. And what are your thoughts on community dialogue and sharing people's feelings and learnings from this book, and how do we move that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, good morning and thank you for having me. So I was set to host this book club at the store. Unfortunately, we didn't get anyone in for it. It was for History is Alive, and with that book club, we kind of talk about things that are historical issues or problems, but that are also happening today as well. And I agree with Dr. Gaddis in terms of, preaching to the choir. And I've seen many people pick up these books. We have a whole current events display. We have displays and bookshelves devoted to these topics. And it has been extraordinarily heartening for me to see people picking up these books, purchasing these books, and trying to do the work, more so than I had before earlier this year, really. So that was really heartening for me. So hopefully we are getting a little bit more of the choir involved and engaged and working on racial healing. But it is definitely, these conversations are so important. And I'm super grateful for the Chamber of Commerce for bringing them out into the public and for kind of dragging us all, whether we're kicking and screaming, doing the work, or coming to the table very willingly. It is hard work, and it is humbling work and necessary work. And this was a really powerful one for me. I'm an emotional person, but I cried a lot during this book. It was very powerful. I really, really loved it. And I do think that I hate to say that it's always like a win-lose attitude, but I do find that I'm a millennial, and I find that I've encountered a lot of win-lose attitudes around this topic. I'm also a mother. I have very young children. I have 3-year-old twins. And so I'm trying to, do the work and make the world a better place for them as well. I don't know where to go from here. I don't have anything to add for that as far as what the next steps are. But I think that the conversation is really important, and letting people sit with their discomfort around the topic is super important as well. And there's so many books and resources and people out there who want to do the work and are leaning towards it and searching for that. So I think that it's a positive. We have so much to go, so much to learn, but we are kind of starting to take those steps, modest steps, as Dr. Gaddis said. But I think that it's gaining some traction, which makes me happy, at least.
Well, good. Thank you. Yeah, I think too, the opportunity to take modest steps brings people in a little easier. I think when we try to do something, very quickly, sometimes we lose some of our supporters in that. And so I think, slowly as we make these steps, we're able to grow that choir. And I think that that's a appropriate metaphor for the book discussion today. Laura, how with this conversation and this topic, what are your thoughts, especially from a tourism visitor's perspective? How does this apply to the county and our role as kind of a visitor's destination, or at least in some cases just visiting through here?
I think it's critical. I feel like our job as tourism professionals is to market Henry County and to encourage people to come and visit. And with that, there's a certain expectation that if you're telling me to come and visit, that when I come, I'm going to be welcome. And so we need to make sure that we're doing the work to make sure that that is true, and that no matter who's coming, that they are welcome and that they receive have positive customer service. And I think that the tie between all the discussions around DEI and customer service are so closely linked that if you understand people and you understand their challenges, their struggles, their cultures, their needs and wants and desires, then you can provide them with better customer service. And so I think it's a critical issue, not just on a human level, but also on a community level, for making sure that we can do our jobs. And so I read a article one time. It was talking about why facts don't sway people, and that why facts don't make a difference. And it kept saying that the only thing that makes a difference or that changes people's minds is relationships, and that, change happens over dinner. That when you're looking people in the eye and you're having a discussion with them, that if you have that relationship, then someone's willing to entertain that the ideas that you're sharing with them are real or true or possible. And so that is just rung in my head repeatedly. And as I'm, listening and reading Dyson, I'm like, okay, I feel like the first step is to make sure that I'm educated, make sure that if I'm in those discussions and I'm having those discussions, that I have something to contribute that's worth listening to, that's not based in random, nonsense or just like bits and pieces of what I've picked up, reading the headlines on Facebook, that it's real and it's grounded, and that I'm having discussions with other people that are, having these experiences. And, so I think that's why I'm so excited about the book discussion. And I've really enjoyed listening to all the different perspectives, is because I think that it helps us as we're shaping how we're perceived as a community and how we need to move forward in either changing that perception, enhancing that perception, and encouraging people to educate themselves too, so that they can, again, join that choir.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some mention, as I said, he wrote this in 2017 or published in 2017, and there's a lot of current event conversations that he includes in there. We also did, the first book we did was Malcolm Gladwell's Talking with Strangers. And that very much was current events. And as we look, we talk about the dialogue and discussion that we have, and making small steps and needing to move that needle further down the road. And boy, that was a really bad mix of metaphors, but move the needle a bit, and that. What are some of those things that we can do working together? We hear the negative as well as the positive about all of the injustice protests and Black Lives Matter, and I think when people are threatened by certain groups like that or different ideas, they come up with the misinformation and the rumors and the myths, and we hear that. how as a group, maybe the five of us in the choir right now, how do we work together? What is it that we can do to either dispel the rumors, to right the wrongs? There's parts about he talks about reparations and that. What is it that we can do?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting that you said that about Black Lives Matter. First of all, let's recognize that the reason some of the myths about Black Lives Matter are being promulgated is because of what we just said, that it's deemed to be a threat to privilege. It's deemed to be a threat to some of the stories we tell ourselves. Why was Black Lives Matter? Why did the Black Lives Matter movement start? It started because of unarmed Black people dying at the hands of police. Matter of fact, I just posted about this on my personal page a few days ago. Since 2016, over 90 unarmed African Americans have died at the hand of police. That equates to one Black person dying every 16 days at the hands of police. There is no other ethnic group dealing with that kind of violence at the hands of unarmed people, at the hands of police anywhere. So what Black Lives Matter was trying to address is that reality. Because of that, as you use the word win-lose, because of that, instead of being honest about that reality, people then started to demonize the movement and add language to it to totally distract what the movement was trying to accomplish, which is to look at some level of police reform and saying, wait a minute, if this was anybody else, if this was white America dying every 16 days at the hands of a police officer, surely somebody would say something. But nobody was saying anything. And that's all Black Lives Matter were trying to do, raise the conversation and awareness to the reality of what was happening. And so I think one of the things we can do is not allow the conversation to get stolen and hijacked, to keep the focus on what the issue was. And I'll give you a real example of that. Is the whole Colin Kaepernick, which he talked in the book. The whole Colin Kaepernick narrative got hijacked to some level of patriotism. It was never about disrespecting the flag and never about disrespecting our troops. It was all about police brutality. And what we did is we allowed certain people to hijack that conversation. And so I think the answer is to not engage in that level of robbery, to not allow, for example, in this conversation, Black Lives Matter to be hijacked. Say, no, that's not true. Here's what it's about, and what are we doing to deal with that? And even in Henry County, what are we doing to deal with police reform so that certain things that are happening in other communities don't happen here? And until we do that, until we have those honest conversations and not allow the narrative to be hijacked, we really won't make progress. So I just think that's the answer, that we stay true to the intentions of these movements. We stay true to the intention of the narrative, so that we can address the issue that's trying to be dealt with through movements such as Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Thank you for answering. That was great.
No,
you want to add?
Mine, I would kind of like to piggyback on what Dr. Gaddis was saying. It seems like we kind of conflate issues sometimes, and like you said, you want to take Black Lives Matter and then put this other kind of negative narrative surround that in a negative narrative. But I think that what Dr. Dyson does, especially with this book, is to unpack all of that, separate them, and especially in terms of when he talks about being white means never having to say you're white, and those kinds of things. They're very piercing, and I can see how that would be uncomfortable for people to hear. But having to separate those things and take them apart and deconstruct them, have those conversations about them. You talk about, like, what do we do? I think we really have to look at those kinds of statements when they're made, and it's hard. I mean, if I had to look at myself like that, like this is who I've been my whole life. This is how I've operated my entire life. This is how my family. This is how and who my family is. Um, and now I have to look at that like it's been wrong or it's been I don't know, somehow against progress, maybe. But I think that if we have, again, having that conversation, Dr. Dyson has pointed us to a bibliography, an entire list of books that we can look to for information. Laura mentioned earlier about, kind of, what to do and that kind of thing. Let's start attacking those books maybe and start having a consistent dialogue, a regular thing that we have to commit ourselves to pour into. I think that's part of what progress kind of looks like too. I know President Barack Obama always said that progress is never a straight line, and I totally believe that. But I do believe that if you're striving for it, you'll make steps toward progress. Um, and so I think consistency in dealing with this issue and these issues that go into the whole idea of whiteness, whatever that is, because Dr. Dyson explains very, very well that it's a construct. It's not a real thing. It's just something that we subscribe to, and it has real consequences. So I just think that putting something together with some consistency and going after really making progress would serve us well.
Thank you. Thank you. With that in mind, we've talked about growing the choir. We've talked about consistent movement, activity, action, not just the conversations, but actually making effective change. Let's talk a little bit, if we can, about creating those allyships and how as a white male I can be an ally to the Black Lives Matter movement, and how do I do that? What should I do? What is acceptable for me to do? I think that's where a lot of times we see the racial breakdown, for lack of a better way of saying it, because there's a discomfort and the unknown. And so a lot of times people won't have the conversation because they don't know what to say. And as Laura says, we're all trying to read more and learn more and at least have some idea of what it is we say and how we say it. So what are some of those steps that those that are watching us on Facebook Live or on Zoom, what are some of those things that we can do to strengthen some allyships or to even create these allyships?
I'm sorry, who are you asking?
I'm throwing that out there in general and seeing if there's a conversation around that, because I think that that's where I think if we're going to move that conversation and activity forward, we're going to have to figure out how do we create these allyships, how do we create these action groups that can help us make that change. There was one person that I watched a video or so, and she was Southeast Asian American, and she believes that even her demographic needs to be aware of this book, because they're able to get more of that white privilege than their Black peers can. And so even as an Asian American, so how do we create these allyships? How do we create these forces to make this change?
I think it's about having dialogue in what I call the commonplaces. It's not the conversation in the Chamber of Commerce's book review discussion. It's the conversations in your circle, in that clique, in those moments where it's the backyard party or maybe the golf course or the family reunion. And it's not a sit down and everybody just sit down and listen. It's just in conversation. Hey, have you read Dr. Dyson's book? Or hey, I just read a book. that was really interesting. Let me share what I've learned, right? What you're going to find though in those, I think what white America is going to find in those conversations is indifference and resistance. And you're going to, I mean, if you listen, for example, and again, I'm not trying to be political, but if you listen to the Bob Woodward tapes with President Trump, he asked him about white privilege. He asked him and said, you know, hey, we were both born of privilege, blah, 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 blah. And what was the president's response? You're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? It was total indifference. So I think Bob Woodward is showing us how to do it. It's engaging those people who we encounter in our everyday or in our own families and having that kind of dialogue. And then when you get the resistance, being willing not to just write it up and go, oh, well, try to continue to have a conversation. And maybe at some point it will penetrate, at least that they'll give you an honest hearing. But what you saw was what I started off with, right? A total dismissiveness, a total indifference. And until, that was the whole premises of Dr. Dyson's book. Until white America is willing to engage this, things are not going to change. And so the only way to get this to happen, to penetrate, to grow the choir, is for white America to start having conversations with white America. Black America has been trying to have these conversations for years. Actually, we're kind of exhausted. And so I don't think it's up to us to fix this problem. It's up to white America to now step up and fix this problem. And by the way, as a pastor, let me say this again, some of these white pastors need to be having these conversations in their churches. Weave some of this in their messages. Talk about race in your messages. Be willing to do it. But what they're afraid of is that the members of their own churches will revolt. And like, what are you doing? And so until white America is brave enough to have these conversations with white America and figure out how to do that and be willing to do that and brave enough to do that, then it's going to be like he said, modest gains.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
To that point, I hate to, you set me up so well, Dr. Gaddis. I'm sorry, but in Dr. Dyson's book, he plainly says for white people to tell other white people what you know. If you've done some of the work, if you've read this book, if you know whatever it is that you're learning, share it with your circle, with your friends, like Dr. Gaddis said, on the golf course, on the at breakfast, or wherever you are in those situations, to share what you know. Tell other white people what you know. Dr. Dyson offers a few really, I think, beneficial offers in this piece. He says, find yourself some new black friends, some black friends that you don't know, that you don't have, or just new black friends, and learn their experiences and find out what their perspective is and how they feel about this whole racial divide we find ourselves in. And then he also says, visit black folks in schools, churches, and jails. That is a major undertaking. It's not something very simple to do. But again, I think you put yourself in a position to really learn firsthand, and not what's been media propagated or any of those kinds of things, but you learn for real from firsthand. I had the awesome opportunity, we're Henry County here, and, we know about the statue in the square being removed, the Confederate statue. I went down the next morning, the podium that it stood on was still there. They hadn't taken that down yet, but there was a gentleman, Confederate regalia all over. So I kind of assumed he was part of that society or whatever it is. And he was talking to one of the news gentlemen, and I kind of walked up on the conversation, and the news guy walked away, and I asked this gentleman if we could have a conversation. And he said, sure. And Joseph, I'm telling you, we stood there an hour just talking. And I mean, he asked me things like, well, why is it that y'all have to have Black History Month? And, and we had that conversation, and I said, well, listen, we get 28 days out of the year, 29 days on a hot year, to discuss our history, where we come from, our origins, our original culture, and those kinds of things. Well, we don't have White History Month. Well, you don't have to. You have every month. It's not something that you have to separate or distinguish. And so, but it wasn't derogatory. It wasn't violent. We never raised our voices. We had a conversation. And again, I just think that that conversation can be had in every form. I mean, wherever you are and however
Yeah.
you operate. And I think that's the benefit of it, to have that, the difficult conversation, but it's a conversation.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, as you know, as we've talked a bit today, and as we've seen the degradation of just the civility of our country, in the last, I'd say really crazy in the last 6 months, but it's been going on. I don't need to tell the choir. But I think that that's a great story to share, that there are people out there that, even with opposing ideas or beliefs or experiences, and I shouldn't have said opposing, but different, that they can still have conversations, and they can still be civil to each other, and hopefully walk away respecting each other just the same. But we're not going to be able to change everybody's minds. We're not going to be able to educate everybody, but we can sure as heck try. We can do our best in making these messages clear and out there. And I think that that's key, because there is so much misinformation, as we've talked about with Black Lives Matter, and everything from the Confederate monument, and I think, Lori, you had alluded to it as well, that we can read the headlines on social media and think that we're getting our information in our news, but anybody can post anything on social media. I can go on there and post right now something that's completely wrong, and it'll be shared, and people will click like on it, and we'll see it go crazy, even though it's wrong, because it's up there, so it must be true. So I think that's a great point. As we have these conversations, we also have to look at where we get our news, where we get our information, and when we see it out there on social media, we have to stop it. Is that kind of something else that I think that we need to be looking at as well? Is there other things that we can do? We talked about not letting the narrative get hijacked. We do need to do the fact checks on social media. What are some other things that people can do if they're not comfortable actually having the face-to-face conversations yet?
Well, again, I think that, because we're talking about this book particularly,
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that Dr. Dyson sets it up well with his own bibliography. We might not want to have the conversation in a personal space or whatever, but these materials are available, to invest yourself in. He talks about Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is one of the more incredible writers of our time. He's just he's done a lot of pieces. What was the one? We were 8 years in power, which we would immediately associate with the presidency of President Barack Obama, but he actually talks about the Reconstruction era. He does kind of like this double time zone kind of thing that he
Mm-hmm.
does with it. But those kinds of things, they're historical fact, and yet and still entertaining, I guess, if you want to call it that. But it's so informative in a way that you can have that conversation, like Dr. Gaddis said, with your people when you go to the golf course, when you go to the nursery school with other mothers, when you go to wherever it is that you're going, and you take this information, have that conversation with those people. It may be a little more difficult to, sure, sit down in a group of Black folks and say, okay, lay it on me. I mean, that's kind of tough. But if you kind of arm yourself with the information that you can get from these other sources, and yeah, social media can be a bit of a pill. I use it because I really kind of have to in my business, and you start talking about marketing and that kind of thing. So you really do have to put your stuff in social media atmosphere. But when you start talking about books and lectures and things like these, try to invest yourself in those ways and get that information and then share it with your network of people. You might find that, hey, how about if we go talk to the, I don't know, student union over at Morehouse and have this conversation, or go talk to a group of kids over at Clark Atlanta or something. But then you've armed yourself with information at that point, and you can have a real discussion. I think the only way that that really happens is if you know. Knowledge is power, and you've got to know what it is that you're talking about. You know, we so much of what we do, I'm sure Dr. Gaddis will agree, is from the what I call the gospel of traditionalism. We just do what's been done, what our parents did, what our grandparents did, and all that kind of stuff, and that's led us to this. We're speaking in silos. We're not talking to each other. We're not communicating. And I think that Dr. Dyson really serves it up really well and gives us a way forward, you know, with this book. So
Absolutely.
And I'd like
Thank
to say,
you.
like, I think one of the things that's been, I guess, beneficial for me, particularly with this book, is like I found it hard to read. And I was like, how much of this is spot on? Is this, you know, he says, this is the experience. And I'm like, is this the experience? And then just asking people, like, is this your experience? And I hear it and it's hard, but when I hear it with people from people I care about, and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, that's 100%, it drives it home so much more clearly. And I feel like when I am then taking what I've learned and telling people I read this great book and it said X, Y, and Z, and people are like, oh, that's just his opinion. I'm like, it's not though. It's these people and this person who I know, who, you know, and I feel like that was really important and impactful. And I appreciate people being willing to talk to me about it and to be willing to be honest, because, you know, I know that I have a lot to learn and that I want to, but I also am like trying to put it in perspective. And I'm like, I read this and I reacted this way. And they're like, you misunderstood Dyson's meaning in that. And then they break down like, this is what this means from a historic perspective. I'm like, okay, that makes so much more sense. And so I think being able to discuss the book with not just people that need to hear it, but also people who already are living it has been doubly helpful, just to kind of refine those opinions and to help me be able to, I think, better maybe voice some of those opinions or thoughts or needs.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Laura. I think that was part of, I guess, my difficulty, for lack of better, my difficulty in getting through the book was because I would read it, and in my world, this is what I got out of it and didn't understand or didn't agree or whatever. But then having the conversations with somebody that could help me process it and see, you know, either the other perspective or see what he was saying, as you said, that helped me then to figure it out the correct way. And I think that's the key. And Dr. Gaddis, I completely respect you and Kipper and you saying that you guys are exhausted, and I've heard that from a lot of my friends, and that you know, as this has gone on, and you know, just over the last 6 months and all the media and everything, and I completely respect that. I also want to say that I thank you both for coming on here today to help educate me, but also to have the conversation with the community. And I think that's so important. That plea from my friends saying, I can't, I'm exhausted, I'm done, you know, whatever they had to do. That was part of what spurred us in the chamber to look at this as a conversation. And when we started talking to some of our coworkers and realizing that they're exhausted, they're stressed, they're struggling with this. And it became, we looked at each other and just said, we've got to do something. We don't know what it is yet, but let's start with conversations. Let's start with having dialogue, and let's see what we can move from a strategy perspective. So again, I thank you both for your thoughts today and your encouragement. And I am hoping that at least some change in our lifetime, that we're able to see some, and knowing that Amanda is looking at this issue and has two twins. I guess that would be two twins. You wouldn't have three twins. But
that happens a lot.
Twins,
Semantics.
has her twins, that she's having these conversations. So that generation, I think, is going to be so much wiser than any that have come before them, and so much. I hate to put all the pressure on them, because I know that we can't leave it all to them, but I think that having these conversations is what is going to get us further down the road, so that this next generation can, take it over the line.
I agree. I lost power for a minute, and my internet went out, so I apologize. I think that I probably went MIA and I missed probably some really good stuff. But I do want to add that on several different points regarding indifference, I do believe that there's a lot of indifference, and like Laura was saying about, you hear one perspective and it seems so almost sensationalized, because it just seems so out of the realm of like what I've experienced in my life. But actually checking in with people that you know and you love and you care about, it's just it's mind-blowing. And to take that opportunity in your own life to do that with people or engaging in a conversation with someone you don't know, and keeping it civil, and keeping it trying to keep your emotions out of it, which is really difficult again for the emotional person, me, but trying to keep your emotions out of it and just have the conversation with grace and humility is so important. And I remember, this is probably going to sound a little weird, but I remember seeing some media portrayals in the last, I would say, my kids were born, so like 3 years of specifically Grey's Anatomy, which it's fine, but of people having these conversations with their young children about, like, if you encounter, with being young Black children in America, if you encounter, police, just stop, put your hands up, do what they say. And hearing that seems such a crazy and sensationalized idea just a few years ago, but also to see it still happening today, it's just insane to me. And I hope that those messages are starting to get through, and even within popular culture and within books, and kind of that just ability to see it kind of play out. I hope it continues to open the dialogue up. And I do hope that it's seen as a call. So we have a message about it being a call to action. And I agree, I do want it to be a call to action. And I do think that kind of having the dialogue and setting it up for the next generation, as you said, and having these conversations while young, and kind of unlearning some of the things that we've all experienced, because I do believe that a lot of it is learned and passed down. I actually had a really awkward and uncomfortable conversation with an older relative yesterday regarding Colin Kaepernick and people, kneeling, and I've tried to explain that it's not about patriotism, and it is a hijacked message. That I'm like, but it's kind of like, what would you like to see then? Like, what would be appropriate for you? What would be an appropriate form of protest and a call to action for you? What would, because nothing seems to, that's a peaceful protest, and if you get louder, then that's aggressive. And again,
Right.
Hijacked, to use Dr. Gaddis's terms, a hijacked message. But I'm all about, if anyone has any, I missed some, but if anyone has ideas about how to kind of make this more of a action-based, like what are the next steps? I don't know if anyone necessarily knows, but I definitely think that drive it home. Like I'm a little bit.
Um,
Thank you. Thank you. Kipper.
to your point, Amanda, I saw that too about, being a call to action, not just, I hope that we all see this as not just a discussion, but as a call to action from Amy Coons. So thank you for that comment. But what we're doing right now, Henry County Chamber of Commerce, I think is phenomenal. I think it's necessary. Um, but I think it could even serve a greater purpose if it was ongoing. That if there were different groups of people that were invited to take part in this discussion and having maybe this book by itself could be a 4 or 5 part discussion, or chapter by chapter, however you want to do it. But I just think that, again, the information and knowledge is power. To have this conversation in an ongoing forum could just do so much good. And especially, I love Henry County. I do. And I like it because of the fact that there's still so much celebration of the Confederacy and all of these very sorts of what I call kind of time warpy. And I don't mean to just, poo on anyone, but those, I like that fight. I like having the fight. I like being able to express to someone my personal experience or my family's experience or whatever that, and bring it into the conversation, and maybe even change someone's mind about what they've always thought, or those kinds of things. I've done some research in personality development, things like that, because one thing that I know is just because you've always thought that way doesn't mean you can't change your mind,
Yeah.
And so I just pray that we can have an ongoing dialogue and change more minds, and with information and not just media propagated stuff, but just real thought out information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our next one we're going to look at intersectionality, and I think that once we get people to really start realizing that they have more in common than they thought, maybe that'll help focus some of those conversations that they can have. They can find where they have things in common, and maybe that'll help bridge some of those conversations for them. Kipper, I do want to point out, I don't know if you've seen it in the chat, but apparently we need to set up a store so we can sell your shirts.
There's a blog site or something like that called the Bitter Southerner, actually, and that's you know about Bitter Southerner,
Yep,
Amanda?
yep.
Okay, so that's where I actually saw a lady at the farmers market in town, and she had this shirt, and I was like, I need that shirt. So go to thebittersoutherner.com and get your own. I'm not advertising them.
I think you're going to see a lot of us walking around with those shirts. We'll have a parade down on the square.
Okay, good deal. Let me know. I'll show up.
All right. We are at about 10:55, so we've got 5 minutes left, and I just want to, I'm going to thank you all and go round robin. If there's any last minute thoughts you want to add to the conversation, and or any suggestions on other books or anything that other people, websites that they should check out that go along with our conversation. So Laura, let's start with you. Any last minute thoughts or last closing thoughts?
I don't have any specific. I appreciate being a part of the conversation and being able to listen to the other panelists' excellent commentary.
Thank you. Dr. Gaddis.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. I would say this, that as you recommend this book to people, or you recommend them perusing and really getting into it, tell them this up front, that it's not an indictment of white America. It's a lament. It's a plea from a grieving heart saying, listen, here's where we are. So that way it may help to disarm some of the people who may absorb some of this information, that we're not trying to indict white America. We're not asking for anything other than to be treated like you. And so I think if we continue it that way, that we're not trying to necessarily indict anybody, but we're just trying to lift up an honest plea for change and honest plea for racial reconciliation in this country, that we live up to the values and the ideals that we've been talking about in this country for years, right? That all we're asking for is us to be who we say that we are. And so maybe that will be a way to grow the choir, and just to let people know all we're trying to do is to live up to who we say we are.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. Definitely. Amanda.
Yes, I don't have much to add. All I will say for everyone watching on Facebook, if you have not read this book, I urge you to. It's extraordinarily powerful. It's really eye-opening, and there is a lot in there to unpack, and it can take you a really long time. Let it take you as long as you need in order for you to get through it. I do have again, as a bookseller, have a lot of books that I can, and if anyone wants to come into Story on the Square, have a conversation about it, we're here. We can kind of point you in the direction of some of the books too, but there are some that we do that I kind of push people towards. One of them is, so you want to talk about race. I have a few books here that are just in my personal collection, but so you want to talk about race. This is a really good one. Talks about, ideas of police brutality and white supremacy. Another really good one is White Fragility. I think that this one might actually be in one of your upcoming book clubs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one's a really good one. And if you're not familiar with the concept of white fragility, it's essentially, it's kind of like white indifference, where white people get very uncomfortable and defensive when you talk about white supremacy. And
it goes back to that win-lose, that in order for Black Lives Matter to win, I have to lose as a white.
Right. And that actually, I have the audiobook of it, but I don't have the actual physical copy. But Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saeed, amazing. Really hard. And it's a lot of it's meant to be like a month-long process of you breaking down your own barriers. And it talks about that, right in the beginning, you're not losing anything. We can all have a piece of the pie. It's not me having rights isn't taking it away from you. So that's another really good one. I don't have the cover of it, but that is amazing as a processing your own thoughts about it book. And then Stamped from the Beginning is a huge book. There's also a young adult version, which is a collaboration by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. So that one is also good and accessible for anyone who has children who are in the YA, in high school area, and wanting to learn a little bit more about the contextualization of it and the historical scope of it a little bit, because I think it is important to, again, kind of take what we've learned. History is very whitewashed, and takes out a lot of the experiences of, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to go too far into it, but
you're fine.
but where it just takes the experiences and kind of glazes over it, and it's all like Christopher Columbus came here and everything was great, any sort of circumstance like that. So it's kind of a good contextualization book. And then I do have two other books. The Color of Law, it talks about how it's essentially how the government and government policy has set up from the beginning white versus black and white above black, essentially. That's obviously a gross understatement. And then Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Alone in the Cafeteria? Is another really good one. It's conversations about race, and it's like a social science, how did we get here book as well. So any other recommendations, let me know.
Yes, stop in Story on the Square and ask Amanda for her recommendation.
Yes, I'll be there. But yes, thank you so much for having me a part of this discussion as well.
No, thank you. Kipper, closing thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Amanda, also you talked about Ibrahim X. Kendi, that How to Be an Anti-Racist. Um, uh,
Yes, How to Be an Anti-Racist is the other
Yeah.
one. I don't have the specific book, but I believe that again is an upcoming Chamber of Commerce book,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited about that one as well. It's another really powerful book, really, really good.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
I just I wanted to say Dr. Gaddis has been my lead-in all day, so to kind of piggyback on to what he was saying again, that this is not an indictment because actually, if you read the whole book, nobody makes it out alive. We're also very guilty. Black folks are very guilty of the same sort of I don't know, finger pointing or castigation that we kind of excuse or accuse other people of as well. Sometimes, especially in the same gender loving community, we have problems with our gay and trans brothers and sisters, and we also put our own aspersions and prejudices and while I know that it is not the same in terms of the political or social implications, it's just as dangerous and just as demeaning and disheartening. And so, he speaks to all of these things in this book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I just can't tell everybody enough that you really need to get this piece. And like Amanda said, take your time reading it. Just go through it, a little bit at a time. It's a lot. It's a big old pill, but take small bites. It's a really beneficial piece. Um, and I love how he describes history as selling your vision of history and making that be what is when it probably isn't anyway. I think we've all been misinformed. Yeah, the Christopher Columbus piece, sure, but you know, uh, Black history doesn't begin with slavery, and we kind of do that here in this country. That's kind of where it begins with us, and so again, information is power. Read all you can. I'm going to reach out to Amanda. You're going to be seeing me because I just think that it's necessary that we inform ourselves and have the conversation. That is the way forward, the way to make real progress. May not be a straight line, but it'll be progress.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I cannot thank you enough. This was a great conversation. I do. This will be up on our YouTube channel. So if you go over to YouTube and search Henry County Chamber, pick out the one in Georgia, and because there's a couple Henry County Chambers up there on YouTube. But we'll have this one up there if you need to go back and watch it. We also have the Malcolm Gladwell one with Talking with Strangers. We have Ajima's. So you want to talk about race is on there. And our third one, I'm looking and I'm drawing a blank.
Using your difference to make a difference.
Yes, thank you. Use your difference to make a difference, which was another great conversation we had just last month with some individuals about how, some of that intersectionality, but how do you make that commitment to make change? So again, thank you all very much. I have taken more than an hour of your time this morning, but I appreciate you sticking around with us. And if there is anything else we can do to continue the conversation with you, please reach out to us at the Chamber. And again, thank you all very, very much. This was a great conversation.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.